Hi everyone and welcome to this tutorial video. This video will show you how to set up the Easy Reporter Strato integration so that your Strato can connect to SAP on-premise and get data from Easy Reporter. It will also show you the steps on how to configure SAP Cloud Platform Integration and Strato Administration tool. The configuration includes two main steps. First is configuring the integration flow in SAP Cloud Platform Integration, and the second main step is configuring the integration flow in the Strato administration tool. Now, before we go to the steps, let's discuss first the SAP CPI setup prerequisites. And these are, first, you have to have a security material in your SAP CPI that corresponds to the SAP user that needs to connect to your SAP on-premise. This SAP user should be an API user and should have a security profile or an authorization profile as a user that is a reporter admin. That means that the user should have access to all the menu and reports in Easy Reporter and can execute all those reports. Next, you should have your SAP base URL. This should be provided by your SAP technical team. You should also have your web service and OData service. These are hard-coded information and provided in the documentation. These are the values that you need to put in the configuration later on. Now, before we go to the main steps, make sure that you have created your security material. To do this, let's click Security Material. We have one here that's already created, and this one is linked to an SAP user. This SAP user is also an API user, and it also has an authorization profile that's the same as admin for Easy Reporter. Now let's start with the first main step, which is configuring the integration flow in SAP Cloud Platform Integration. Let's start by selecting Strato SAP CPI. Click Artifacts. This is the integration flow that connects to SAP on-premise. Click the icon under Actions and select Configure. On the next screen, fill out the fields under the Sender tab. The setting in this section is needed by the Strato admin tool. The Strato admin will use this information later to connect to SAP on-premise system. One of the most important fields in this section is SAN address suffix. We allow to have a dynamic naming for suffix so that if you have several systems connecting to one SAP CPI tenant, you can configure several suffixes. For example, you can configure one each for dev, test, and production. So for this example, let's type demo. And later on, this will be part of the URL that you have to configure in your Strato admin tool. The other important field in this section is authorization. There are two options under authorization. First is user role. This means that your caller, in this case, Strato admin, should use authentication with username and password to connect to SAP CPI. Second is client certificate. This is the authorization that we will use for this example so that we are not dependent on an as user. So let's go ahead and select client certificate. Click Select to upload the certificate for Spinifex IT. The certificate should come with the integration package. Select a file and click Open to actually upload the file. Now let's move on to the Receiver tab. Again, this is the configuration that will connect your SAP CPI integration flow to SAP on-premise system. In here, we have to configure two receivers, SAP BSP and SAP OData. Now, let's first talk about SAP BSP. There are three fields that you need to populate. The first one is ER SAP domain. Second is ER SAP domain, WS, or web service. And third is credential name. Also, make sure that your proxy type is Internet if you're not using SAP Cloud Connector. If you are connecting directly to SAP on-premise, select Internet as your proxy type. For the timeout field, you may increase this depending on how much time you need to complete the execution of the integration before it times out. If running your reports in SAP on-premise usually takes too long, you may increase this so that you don't have to time out whenever you connect to on-premise. Now let's go back to the 3 mandatory fields. For the credential name, this is the security material that we configured and was shown earlier on this video. This is linked to an SAP user that connects to SAP on-premise. For the SAP domain, this is the SAP base URL and one of the prerequisites that was mentioned earlier. You may do something like this so you can just copy and paste the field values. Again, this information is provided by your SAP technical team. And for the SAP domain WS or web service, this is the web service and also one of the prerequisites. You can, again, just copy and paste the value. To configure the SAP OData part, just select SAP OData from the receiver drop-down list. You will notice that the value for SAP domain is the same as the value that you entered for SAP BSP. The credential name should also be the same as the one in SAP BSP. For SAP domain OData, this is the OData service and also one of the prerequisites. You can, again, just copy and paste the value. This is also included in the documentation that's provided by your SAP technical team. Click Save, click Deploy, and then click OK. Now let's go back to the overview screen and let's check the status of the integration flow. On the next screen, you will see the status of the integration flow that you just deployed. In this case, it's Strato to Easy Reporter integration, and you'll notice that it's tagged as starting. Now let's stay on this page as we move on to the second main step, which is configuring the integration flow in the Strato administration tool. The prerequisite for this part is the URL for OData call that you can get from this page under the Endpoints tab. Copy the second URL from the second line, the one without token at the end, and put it on your notes. Now let's go to Strato Admin Tool. In Strato Admin Tool, click the Edit System Details icon. Navigate to SAP OData Settings. To use SAP CPI, enable this feature here that says Allow to use SCI proxy for SAP. Next is provide the URL for OData calls. This is the URL that you got earlier from the Endpoints tab and copied on your notes. So you can just copy and paste it on this line. Select Bearer from the SAP Logon Detail drop-down list so that you can use the client certificate authentication. Click the arrow button to upload the certificate. Select a file with the PFX extension. For the username, you can use the username that you have defined in SAP CPI. For the passphrase, this will be given to you together with the SAP integration flow and the certificate. In this example, we are using spin 123. Now we're done configuring the Strato admin tool. But before we test this, let's check first the integration if it's already published. You will notice that it is now tagged as started. And so we can begin testing. Now let's go back to Strato admin. Click Test. To check that, go to the Overview screen. Click the All Integration Flows box. The next screen will show you that the Strato to Easy Reporter integration is completed. We were able to make a test connectivity to SAP CPI and eventually to SAP on-premise system. Now let's go back to Strato admin tool again and click Save. The Save icon is located on the lower right corner of your screen. Now you are able to configure the Strato admin tool and SAP CPI integration flow. And this concludes this tutorial video. Thank you very much for watching.